This is the Impressions Exchange Podcast.
Impressions Exchange Podcast.
Where all topics impacting the graphic imaging and printing industry are addressed via in-depth news coverage, analysis, and timely interviews.
Welcome to this episode of the Impressions Exchange Podcast. I will be joined by three guests on this roundtable discussion episode. Gary Jones, Vice President, Environmental Health and Safety Affairs, and Sara Osorio, Environmental Health and Safety Affairs Coordinator, both of Printing United Alliance, and Linda Casey, Content Director of Packaging Impressions. They will all join me to discuss the recent proposals to ban carbon black in New York and New Jersey. We discuss the far-reaching implications these bans would have, not only on the printing industry, but on brands and consumers. We talk about what the Alliance is doing and how the industry can get involved. So thank you so much for being here today. Welcome, Linda, Gary, and Sara.
Thank you, Ashley. We're so glad to be here.
Yes, Ashley, thanks for inviting us. This is such an important topic. We're excited to talk about it.
Thanks for having me, Ashley.
Yeah, so we have some big things to talk about today. Gary, I'm going to start with you. A few months ago, we did a video talking about this carbon black proposal for New York. So can you tell me what's going on in New York with that? You know, what's the status right now, and maybe what's the Alliance doing about it?
Yeah, actually, when we first talked about this, this was at the beginning of the stage of the process, and now we're kind of nearing the end of it because New York State's legislative calendar is really done first week of June. There's been a lot of action on the bill since we chatted. The bill was introduced. It's moved its way through the Senate and the Assembly. In fact, it's moved further in the Assembly, and we've been focusing a lot of our efforts really with both the Senate and the Assembly in terms of stopping the bill. We've tried to have conversations with the bill sponsors, and those weren't very well. We had conversations with other legislators and legislative staff, and it was very well received in terms of the unintended consequences. And as we've talked about, well, the primary unintended consequence that our concern is that essentially the carbon black ban is going to ban black printing ink, because that's the primary pigment that's in the inks that are used in black. And that has an impact not only just for the information that's printed in black ink, instructions and barcodes, for example, but also impacts four-color printing. So any image that would be on a package. And I think it's important to understand, too, when we talk about packaging, that it includes labels that are placed on the package. The way that this legislation was written is so broad that it isn't just a package, it's a label. But the package can also include, say, for example, envelopes, because a lot of material is shipped in envelopes. So, when I think of a package, as I think we've talked about, I think of a cereal box right away, but it's really more than just the individual package. It's the labels that go on the package, it's envelopes, it's anything that can be used to ship something in falls under this requirement. So where we are in the legislature, we have about 2.5 weeks left. We have pulled out all the stops in terms of opposing the legislation. We've gotten letters of opposition we've submitted to the committees. Our latest round of letters, we've asked the entire Assembly and the entire Senate to encourage your leadership to not act on the bill, to not move the bill. And so we just submitted that letter last week to New York Assembly. So it is moving, it's still live, and it could still be passed by the end of the legislative session.
Wow. So I think, one of the key things here is, maybe some people listening didn't understand the impact that it would not just be the primary packaging, that it's the labels and the envelopes, as you mentioned. So it's massive.
Oh, it's enormous. It's really what we've been trying to explain to the New York State legislators that would take an audience with us, is that it's going to be devastating to their economy, because when you look at anything that's sold in a package, which is a tremendous amount of materials and goods, it's really going to have a major impact on them from that respect. And when we also look at the impact on our industry, which is really where, what drove us to initially start this interaction, is that anybody involved in packaging, manufacturing, converting, label manufacturing, converting, envelope converting, are going to be out of business because they won't be able to sell their products into New York State. And any company outside of, and it isn't just New York State, because it's any product manufactured in New York State package, but it's anything that's shipped into the state. So it has a national implications with respect to the ban.
That's just unbelievable. So, Gary, you had mentioned letter of opposition that the Alliance had submitted. So, Sara, I'm gonna see, maybe can you tell us what's the content of the letter of opposition?
Yeah, so through reading the language of the bill, we've discovered different reasons why we think they might want to be banning carbon black. In the case of New Jersey, we think there's three main reasons. One being that they're saying that carbon black is toxic. Second, that black plastic cannot be recycled. And third, they want to increase recycling content, as Gary mentioned. So through our research, we realized that black plastic, when encapsulated in a matrix like ink, it is not toxic. There's only some toxicity that has been seen when it's in a powdered form, but when it's in ink, that does not exist. Several government agencies like OSHA, OEHA in California, the International Association for Research on Cancer, they've all said this. When carbon black is encapsulated in the matrix, it is not toxic. The second reason is that black plastic can be recycled. In fact, black plastic is perfectly recyclable, but the problem is that the technology in these MRFs is very outdated. So they don't have the technology that Gary and I have discovered that black plastic can be recycled. There's a lot of new technology that does not confuse the plastic with the recycling belt or the line. So black plastic is perfectly recyclable. And then I think one of the unintended consequences that they don't realize through the banning of this bill is that, as Gary mentioned, a lot of the recycled content is going to be banned because these materials are banned. So a lot of paperboard, when they're recycling corrugated, they don't de-ink it. So then they're not going to be able to they are not going to be able to meet the recycling content needs because of the unintended consequences of the bill.
Right. And you mentioned New Jersey. So that's probably a more recent update, is that there's also a proposal for a ban on black in New Jersey. So is it the same thing that's going on, or is it a different ban?
So it's a little bit different because the ban in New York is related to an extended producer responsibility bill. But in New Jersey, it's just the ban on toxics on packaging. So it is a little bit different, but we think that a lot of these bills are kind of taking influence off of each other.
Right. And you had mentioned, Gary, I think, prior to this, you'd mentioned there was even a bill proposed in Vermont. Was that also similar?
Yeah, the bill in Vermont was proposed in January, and it was a toxics and packaging similar to the New Jersey legislation. It wasn't tied to extended producer responsibility. And we took a wait and see attitude for the Vermont legislation. The consensus was to kind of just monitor that bill to see what happens to it. There was no action beyond it just being introduced. And so it didn't make it through the deadline for action this year. So that kind of died. So, but that represents the third state. So clearly we have an emerging trend here with this focus on carbon black. As Sara pointed out, it's really not, it's not well thought out, and it's not a sound basis for banning carbon black. It's really not toxic. When it's in an ink, it's not toxic. Sara said, we have letters from OSHA, OEHA that says it's not a toxic chemical when it's bound up in a matrix. And the impact on separation technology, that problem has been solved by technology itself. And again, it's counterproductive because the EPR, at least the EPR legislation, and to some extent the New Jersey legislation, it has some mandates in there that you have to incorporate certain recycled content by certain dates in your products. The one that sticks out is corrugated. So there's a mandate in the New Jersey legislation that for corrugated, it must be 75% post-consumer content. Our opposition letter has pointed out that it's counterproductive because if you're going to ban carbon black, you won't be able to get recycled corrugated, because when they recycle corrugated or paperboard, as Sara said, it's not de-inked. So you're going to have carbon black in there. So in essence, they're banning materials that they want, that they're mandating people to use. So it's kind of counterproductive cross purposes in terms of the structure of the legislation. And that's what our goal is, to try and point those and educate the legislators before they make a final vote on the bill.
Right, right. And so obviously, we have Linda here today, who is the expert for the packaging side of things with her audience of packaging impressions. And so Linda, hearing all of this right now, for your audience who, packaging printers and converters and brands, how is this going to impact them if they can't have black on any of their packaging?
Well, in so many ways. And, to build on what Gary and Sara have talked about, being counterproductive, a lot of brands also have targets. They have sustainability targets that they're scrambling to make. And they want to increase the recyclable materials, the amount of recyclable materials that are in their packaging. And they can't do that with something like this going forward. It's really going to hurt brands' abilities to hit those sustainable targets that they have publicly announced. So that is it's going to be a huge impact to definitely the brands. I also would say on the brand side as well, black is often the color that is used to print in line with the production line. So I know, Sara, you've written about this, about the fact that the lot numbers and expiration dates are often printed in black. So that is going to be, those are on those pack out lines, and they are inkjetted onto the label or onto the package. The brands are going to have to retool all that, and they're going to have to figure that out. And that's going to be a huge problem as far as the required information on the package. And then, of course, in preprint and for the converters and the printers, you can't, process printing, we need our black, right? And their customers are very particular. The brands are very particular. Print buyers are very particular about the colors, the way that their products are perceived on shelf. One thing you can't have is have two products that maybe are, say, made within a week of each other, but if one doesn't have the ability to use carbon black, it looks much more faded. That product's just going to sit on the shelf. It's not going to be picked up by the consumer. The consumer is going to incorrectly perceive that it's faded because of time or some other reason. And therefore, it's going to really hurt not only the retailers, but the people who sell into the retailers, the Procter and Gambles of the world, the Unilevers of the world. Their product is just going to sit on shelf because the colors aren't going to be the same kind of pop that they've had before. And therefore, consumers are going to assume that the product is inferior, which is definitely something that brands don't want to be affiliated with. Retailers don't want to be affiliated with. And packaging converters and printers don't want to be a part of having this incorrect perception made. So they want to make sure that their customers' products look the best. So many impacts.
And I know we're kind of like speaking in hypotheticals here, but something that just occurred to me, and I don't know if this is true. And Gary, you mentioned that the wording here is kind of vague, so it essentially encompasses everything. Would it require the packaging, if this were to be implemented, would it require the packaging that's on shelf right now to be yanked because it's a toxicity issue? Or would those products be able to live out their life cycle, like be sold on shelf until?
Yeah, that's a great question. That concept is called sell-through, but there's nothing in the legislation that addresses the sell-through, so it's silent. So you could theoretically say it's banned. Now, the New York State ban is 2 years after enactment of legislation, so it's not immediate. So you would have, I think maybe then you would say companies would have 2 years to get the shelves cleared. before the ban kicks in, because once it's in, I don't see nothing in the legislation that allows the sell through. Because typically, sometimes they'll say when they do these types of things, you can, as you use up existing inventory, when the new inventory comes in to replace it, it must meet the requirements from this date forward. So there's nothing in the either the New Jersey or the New York legislation that deals with sell through. The one comment I can say is that both of them are so poorly worded and poorly written from a legislative perspective that, in essence, as we were saying, it's going to ban pretty much packaging as we know it, because of the way that it's structured and written. And that's just another example for sell through. And just to pick up on a point that Linda had mentioned, and we've been raising this question, is UPC codes. Like, who goes to a store and doesn't buy anything that doesn't have a UPC code associated with it today? Rarely does that happen. We're not even sure the scanners can read a non-carbon black printed UPC code. We've never, I don't think anybody's investigated, because nobody's had to investigate it. So just from that simple transaction that occurs every day, day in and day out, we're not even certain that that's going to occur with a ban on a carbon black.
There are just so many, elements of this that I certainly did not think about, but I'm sure a lot of people, in the audience, they haven't necessarily thought about. So this has been very helpful for you to go into everything. Linda, do you have any questions for your packaging audience?
Well, I mean, I guess the one thing that I would emphasize, and we probably want to talk about how our audience can help raise some of the awareness about this issue. I know that and Gary, you're so right about it being badly written in the wrong words. Isn't the New Jersey one called like Toxic Packaging Reduction Act or something? And it's not, carbon black is, again, not toxic when it adheres to a matrix. So it's not a toxic chemical, but it's in this Toxic Packaging Reduction Act, which it's so important to, get that word out, because people will say, read Toxic Packaging Reduction Act. Of course I'm for that. And it's like, that's not what it is. It's a misnomer, because it's a misnomer because the carbon black is included in this. And so how would people get involved in trying to get the word out, trying to help the governments understand that this is really going to impact their businesses, their lives, and it's going to impact society in general?
Oh yeah, I mean, you picked up on one very strong point about a lot of legislation. The word toxic derives a lot of emotion for people. And as we talked about previously, a lot of legislation is driven on emotion and not fact. If it was fact-based, if they did simple research, they would determine that carbon black is not a toxic chemical, but it's lumped into this group of, it's a toxic soup, and it's not true. It's not accurate at all. In terms of what to do, there's two things that we would suggest. The first is we have action alerts that we're running off our webpage, both for New York and New Jersey. We would encourage everyone to go to our webpage and submit a letter to the representative. We have a templated letter. You have to be in New York State or New Jersey, but you put in your name and address. It will identify your representative, and then you can hit send, and the letter goes into them for opposition. I can say where we are in New York, we're further along on the process. In New Jersey, we're just beginning that. So really need the pressure in both states to be applied. And I can say that the message in New York is being heard. So, from some of the meetings that we've had, inside information is that more and more representatives are hearing about the negative consequences, and they're starting to ask some questions. And I think it slowed the bill down in New York State. And we need to mount that same level of pressure in New Jersey. We need people submitting letters to that. The other thing is to reach out to Sara and I if they have contacts. If they know, a lot of times, companies are in certain legislative districts. They may have relationships with a representative, either Senate or Assembly person. please reach out to us. We want to take advantage of those relationships. We have to use all the avenues that we can for communication. So we've actually had a couple members who have contacts in the legislature, and we're working with them on making sure that they're delivering the message that we need to be delivered. And so I think those are first two things that they can do immediately. And I think there's other ones, but I would suggest that would be the two primary things that they would do.
Thank you so much, Gary. And I will, for everyone listening, include links to Printing United Alliance website and also Sara and Gary's information, so you can reach out. Thank you all so much. I think this has been really informative and educational. And thank you for bringing awareness to these crucial and important topics.
Absolutely. We need, as I said on my last call, we need the industry getting involved. We need industry getting engaged. It does help. It does work. And we need to keep the pressure up for 3 more weeks in New York. And then for New Jersey, it's a longer haul. So just because you submit a letter or you go on our webpage, you need to continuously message your representatives. And they do listen. You have to cut through. Everyone's trying to get their message heard, but it's the continuous messaging back to those representatives. And we need to be successful both in New York and New Jersey.
Thank you so much. So thank you, Linda, Gary, Sara. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Ashley.
I want to give my sincere thanks to Gary, Sara, and Linda for joining me today and spreading awareness about this important topic. If you're interested in learning more about the issues presented today or to access the action alerts, visit Printing United Alliance's website at printing.org. I will include a link to that below, as well as the contact information for Gary and Sara. Finally, I want to thank all of you, our listeners. Stay tuned for the next episode of the Impressions Exchange podcast.